want to get started by just taking a poll of the audience. Who has cooked with cannabis? Okay, is that, and among you?
Who's cooked with cannabis and wants to admit it?
Yeah, okay. Who among you that have raised their hands cook with cannabis frequently? Okay, good, all right. So we're all set then. I want to, I just want to say that, many people, even people that have not cooked with cannabis, have the sort of time-honored story about someone saved all your dirt weed and tossed it in the oven with some cake mix, and you grew roots into the floor and you ended up staring into the abyss. There's lots of stories out there in the world, but we've moved beyond that with legalization. People have been cooking with cannabis for thousands of years for really good reasons, whether they're ritual reasons or medical reasons, or even just as a seasoning, a flavoring, something that tastes good. But, with decades of prohibition, that's kind of been obscured and stigmatized, and by the collective memory of every terrible pot brownie that ruined your night. Yeah, right. So with legalization, though, increasingly we're sort of discovering this ancient tradition, and we're learning from it, and chefs and other people are innovating from it and doing things that have never been done before. Chef David and Joline are two of those people that are innovating. So I want to ask each one of them how they came to cannabis and culinary cannabis in particular. And let's start with Joline, and maybe you can finish up by telling us about Kitchen Toke and how it came to be.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to try to be interesting. I will tell you that I had to dose before I got up here, so that's how cannabis helps me, because I get nervous and I'm kind of shy and I hate being in front of people. But one of the biggest misconceptions about me, I think, is that I'm high all the time, which could not be further from the truth. But I'll get into that later. I started Kitchen Toke because I spent my career, 20 years on the backside of a camera, being a creative director in the food industry, restaurants, chefs, cookbooks. I used to do work for Food Network, Crate and Barrel, their food photography, Better Homes and Gardens, craft foods. And in doing that work, I paid attention a lot to food trends and what was happening, and talking to chefs and what they were doing, and I sort of knew that chefs were cooking with cannabis, and I was paying attention to the landscape and recognizing that Colorado was going to be legal soon. And right about that time, my right-hand person on my team, Nellie Williams, who's also the art director of our magazine, her dad was diagnosed with cancer in 2011. And I got firsthand knowledge about his battle, how hard it was for him. He was in Missouri, in a town called Washington, just an hour south of St. Louis. And he had zero access to cannabis at all. They have no medicinal laws, or actually they just went medicinally legal just this past year, but at the time in 2011, they had nothing available to him. And I called a friend of mine in early 2016. I knew two people. I can't even believe this, but I actually only knew two people that were in my life that actually used cannabis and made it known to me that they were users. So I asked them if they could get me some high THC chocolates, and I was going to get them to her dad in Missouri. And I was too nervous to ship them, so I was really nervous, actually. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna do something illegal. I called my brother and I said, in case anything happens, you just be by your phone. Like, I swear, I thought I was gonna get arrested or something. And I put him in my trunk and I drove down to Missouri and presented the chocolates to him, which I was really nervous about too, I'm very aware that I'm Mexican, and I'm like, great, the Mexican's gonna show up in Missouri with the weed chocolates. And to my surprise, and he was very receptive, and he ate 3 in a row, and this is a man who was literally dying of cancer. His neck was swollen 3 times the size of a normal human neck. His lymph nodes were choking him from the inside out. You could not be in this room and not have that be a profound moment, what I always call a defining moment in my life. I think it changed who I was. And I watched the cannabis chocolates work on him. He started to play with his grandkids. He wanted to eat. He cracked open beer. He ate a sandwich. And I knew when I left that day was going to be the last time that I saw him. It was very emotional. It was hard for me to leave. They had been like a second family to me. Shortly after I left, he passed away about 3.5 weeks later. And when his daughter, I mean, you never really recover from losing your dad, but when she got to a better place, I said to her, what if we, did exactly what we're doing now, but we actually created something to help more people like your dad? And that's how Kitchen Toke was born. So.
David.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. I spent my entire career in restaurants, so always high stress scenarios, always dealing with lots of multitasking and really trying to figure out, how you start your day knowing you're about to spend 12 hours yelling at someone, being yelled at, getting burned, burning something, just constantly trying to multitask. And after a lot of these shifts, chefs drink. Some of them do lots of other things, but cannabis became something for me to kind of help wind down after a long day, a long shift, a long week. Throughout this entire process, I was noticing that I was having lots of stomach cramping, I was having lots of high stomach acid, and really trying to figure out if it was my lack of sleep, if it was my career choice, what it could be, and eventually realized that I needed to go see a doctor, and stubbornly agreed to go, and went, and I was told that I had chronic Crohn's disease, which, as a chef, there's probably nothing more ironic to be told you can't eat what you want to eat, you can't stand all day, every day, you can't do what you've been doing and what you put all your time and energy into your career. So had to start, deciding what that treatment looked like, how it was going to affect my work. Started on 3 or 4 medications at one time that were delayed release capsules because my issue is deep inside my body, so there's no real quick way to get there. So started taking a lot of things, and the side effects that came with it are similar to some of these commercials you see where they may cause tuberculosis, brain damage, liver damage. You have to agree, you have to literally sign off on accepting all these other things just to fix one thing, and that just, it didn't really make a lot of sense for me. So started to connect with friends that I value their opinion, and really started investigating what options were out there, and I'd say 80% of them said, have you tried cannabis? At the time, it had only been a social use for me for calming down from the end of the night, as I mentioned, but I started to read more into it. Couldn't find a whole lot of research, but decided to go speak to my doctor. And at this point, I'm taking through an IV every 8 weeks, 400 milligrams of a drug called Remicade. I'm sitting next to, I was the youngest person in the room by far. Every 8 weeks I would go in, and if you just take a second and think about, what if you took enough Tylenol to last you 8 weeks? Like, what would your body do? It would reject it. It would literally, you'd vomit, among other things. Someone would have to pump your stomach. This process became such a dent in my life, going into the hospital, spending time, figuring out how you can't really eat the day before in order for this to work properly. You don't want to eat afterwards. Needless to say, I decided to look for an alternative. So it's been since last June, I've been able to officially stop all synthetic medications and go 100% cannabis. And a big part of that is from edibles. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it can help a lot of people, and a lot of it is stress, a lot of it is anxiety, a lot of it is inflammation in different parts of your body. But for me, it didn't always make sense to smoke. I don't smoke cigarettes. It hasn't been a part of my life. So figuring out a way to use my professional background into cannabis and bring it into food, started looking at what were some of the best ways to get into your body. Fat is one of the best because it gives you lots of energy as well. And so that's kind of how the business started. And got a medical card, went into a bunch of dispensaries, and all the food was just terrible. It was just high fructose gummy bears. I don't eat candy. So really started to kind of go down that path, and I'm sure we can touch on some of this later, but that was kind of the main focus, main start for me to start, looking into different edibles that were available and what the holes were in the market.
Okay, those are just 2 really good stories about how cannabis is helpful in a medical sense, but the big question here that we want to address tonight is, why we know that ingesting cannabis, your body metabolizes it differently than if you inhale it. So why cook with cannabis as opposed to just inhaling it?
Well, my first answer to that is, I don't know about all of you, but I'm not a smoker. I'm not a vapor. I don't like inhaling things into my lungs if I don't need to. I'm very athletic, fit person. When I was training for a triathlon in 2011, I injured discs in my neck and tore a rotator cuff. So I started paying attention a lot to the things I was eating and looking at food as medicine.
Maybe we can address what is a cannabinoid and what role do they play in the cannabis plant?
Oh God.
Sure, I can step in. I also wanted to mention, I think why I cook with cannabis, a big part of what I struggled with was getting good quality rest, was getting good sleep. And for me, eating and processing through my liver, it's a slower delivery, so I could eat something before I went to bed, fall asleep naturally while I was asleep, start to, process a lot of it, and it would help me get a better night's sleep. So I'd wake up every day feeling I was in a better position to fight anything. Frankly, I think if you get good food and good rest, your day is on a good track. So cannabinoids, I mean, there's lots of, I don't know how deep we really want to go, but I think most people are familiar with THC and CBD. I think those are kind of the big ones. There's CBG and CBN, and I think knowing that, I live in Boston right now, so I'm in a legal state should be further along than it is, but Chicago's going to go through, there's going to be a lot of terms coming all over the place, and really understanding them is going to be tricky, right? Because you can get CBD from that's not associated with THC, and some that is from hemp, and et cetera. But ultimately, I think what people really need to understand is that it's going to be different for all of you. So your balance is going to be completely different. Just like if we all had a few drinks, it's going to affect everyone differently. It's going to, depending on, did you eat anything all day? Now you're going to consume alcohol, for example. It's going to affect you differently. Same with cannabis. So picking out hybrids, picking out something that's 18-to-1, 1-to-1, meaning 18 parts CBD, 1 part THC, and frankly, what time of day you're going to utilize that is really going to dictate your path through absorbing it.
There are lots of ways to target what you're trying to address with cannabis, both in terms of strains and isolates and concentrates, and
Sure.
also methods of ingestion. So let's get back again to why eating. Eating cannabis affects your body differently than you would if you inhaled it. So
Sure.
How does that work?
If you get high, if you smoke a joint, it's going to be a head high. Same with dabbing, probably true.
Same with dabbing.
Same with dabbing.
I'm not
I
the
point to
authority.
him
I know,
because.
like,
Sorry.
No, it's quite all right.
When you
Yeah.
eat cannabis, it's more of a whole body high. You can feel it all through your body. So, if you're trying to get high, or if that is your end goal. I mean, I personally eat in nano dosing so that I'm never high. I just get the full plant that affects my endocannabinoid system, but I'm never high.
I think it also lasts longer, right? I think when you're smoking, it's quick.
Yeah.
It's a few minutes.
Yep, 15, 20 minutes.
You'll be right into it, right? And eating, I think kind of you touched on it earlier, the brownie story, which is the stereotypical thing that we hear. It takes a lot longer to kick in. People think it's not working. They eat an extra bite or two, then before they know it,
they've overdosed.
they don't know it. Yeah, exactly.
They're under the table.
It's too
They're
much.
laughing hysterically on the sofa, and they can't stop.
But I think overall, it's really cooking with cannabis. I think our goal in a lot of things. My friend Eric is here, who I've cooked with for a good portion of my life. It's really to merge into what you're already doing in your daily routine. If you want to merge cannabis into your salad dressing and have it at lunch, if you want to make it into a butter or a smoothie or something in the morning, if you want to have ice cream in your freezer and you can take a few bites when you want it, as you want it, put it back in, come back to it later. So it's more of cannabis is coming at all of you in all the states. So if you're not a smoker, you have to figure out what way you can access it. I think tinctures are great, but most people don't want to just have a droplet and put it into their mouth. They want to enjoy the experience. And I think that's what we try to push and curate, is pairing high quality cannabis with high quality food. So for us, we want to celebrate a lot of the flavor. There's different strains that are citrus strains. Some are skunky, some diesel, some in between all of these. So cooking with it helps really explore and express a lot of the characteristics of the plant as well.
Okay, maybe can we talk a little bit about sort of cooking 101? Like, how would you get started? What would you, what is a basic, simple infusion that someone can do that's just getting started? And maybe we can move on to dosing after that. How do you learn how much to take to address your issues?
Well, I could say simplest, easiest. I mean, have you guys all tried CBD? Have you all put it under your tongue? And no, you've done that. I don't know about all of you. I mean, I'll do it before I go to bed, of course. But I also don't love, I'll hold it there and then I swallow and I always go, I have this depending on which CBD oil I have, some are really green and thick and don't taste that great, and others are tolerable or might have some, flavor put in. But either way, I think if I can figure out a way sometimes to dose without doing that, a very simple way, whether it's like David said, I'm on the go a lot, so it's in a salad or a quick edible or a smoothie or a shake or in some form of capsule, something like that is something that I would rather do, and then also in a butter or olive oil or anything like that. That's my favorite way to dose.
Yeah, I think butter, olive oil, fat is probably the best vehicle to utilize it if you want to have, an ongoing delivery, if you want to have it available to merge it into anything you're doing. There's a lot of water-soluble tinctures now, so you could put it in your coffee, you could put it in your lemonade, you could put it in something else. Traditionally, they were with fat, now getting different technologies, nanotechnologies, getting it into water. So it's kind of changing what pathways you can take with it.
We were talking about this in the car on the way down, and what I think is really cool is if you have a certain flour that you really love, you can make a butter or an olive oil out of it, and it will last you a while. If you just want to have it a little bit here and a little bit there, there's so many great products. We just this 2 months ago, I started an online shop because there's so much stuff on the market today that you can't decide what's good and what's bad. I think it's hard to tell. I've walked into CBD shops and I look at the shelves and I'm like, I'm doing this every day. I can only imagine how hard it is for other people to discern what is snake oil and what's really good. So, but I think there are nowadays there are literally pantry items. There's salt, there's sugar, there's honey. There's
lots of things,
I could help me.
And this is where it's coming. I think there's very little data on how cannabis reacts with food items over time. So for dairy is a great example. There's very little data on that. So if you want to Google what does cannabis do to dairy over time, you're not going to find any articles. It's going to push you to something else. So that's what we do kind of on the back end of our business is start to put data points in on is cheese going to spoil if we age cheese in cannabis? If we leave ice cream in a certain context with certain oxygen, what does it do? How does it break down? So the things that have been proven are high fat that can ideally sit in a refrigerated area, but really trying to find, is it sugar? Is it fat? Is it acid? What kills it? So I think part of what we know is that certain heat, right, triggers THC. So if you ate some raw cannabis flower, not much, it's going to get stuck in your teeth. I was going to say something's going to happen, but you're not going to feel much of the effect. If you decarb it, meaning remove the carboxyl group, it'll be active, and that means basically, are we jumping?
I think we got to stop right there and talk about what that is. What is decarbing, and why do you have to do it?
Yeah.
So
decarboxylation is what we're talking about. Do you all know what that means? Okay, so every time you heat up your weed, it's like you light your joint, you put heat to it, that activates the THC, and it's called the decarboxylation. And you have to do the same thing when you mix your weed with a fat. So if you put your flour in with butter or you put your flour in with olive oil, you have to heat it up and activate the ingredients, and I'll let David take it from here.
The cannabis has to be hot, right? So the idea is that it hits 165 degrees for about 12 to 15 minutes, and it will become active. So a lot of people will take flour, which is your typical what you would put in a joint, grind it for surface area, put it in the oven at 200 degrees for an hour or so, and that would be decarb. That flour, however, becomes brown, becomes oxidized, takes on a different note. So if you loved that citrus element that was in there, most of it is now gone. Even though it's active, you've kind of lost the whole point of why you purchased that specific strain. Yeah. So there's ways to do it where you can vacuum bag it in a food safe bag at home. I don't know if you guys are familiar with immersion circulators. It's basically a cooking process where you cook something slowly in a water bath.
You can use a Ziploc bag.
You can use it, right, and go through it. But ultimately, you have to heat the cannabis for it to be active. So if you want to heat it in butter, strain it, use it. Heat it in olive oil, strain it, use it. Is really the way to go. So heat is kind of the key to triggering.
Before I ask you guys about the other ways, the myriad other ways that you can cook with it, let's talk about fat. Generally, you have to cook with fat. Why is that?
So a couple of reasons. One, absorption is really the best way. I think a lot of the early methods of cannabis delivery through food were from medical studies. So if you eat a gram of carbohydrates, you get 4 kilocalories of energy per gram. If you eat a gram of protein, you get the same. If you eat a gram of fat, you get 9 kilocalories of energy per gram. So ultimately, when you're looking at someone like myself with Crohn's disease and I'm going through a flare-up and I want to have healthy energy coming into my body plus cannabis, I want as much fat as possible. And you can go through different channels. There's butter coffees, bullet coffees, where you're pureeing coffee into butter. Cannabis butter is kind of that trend in that regard. But fat really helps push it through your system and get it into right. And cannabis binds the fat, right?
Okay, but you can't. It's pretty difficult to say. This is a chef I've been working with. Claims to make cannabis vinegar, which is actually not easy to do and not super potent, but he says it has other benefits. That's because certain cannabinoids won't bind with the vinegar, right?
Sure.
It requires a fat.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So before we get into the other ways, let's talk about when you're working with flower or like the actual plant. One of the tricky things to do is to dose. Like, how do you not take too much? How do you know when you've taken enough?
Well, as I mentioned, everyone's different. Everyone's body, everyone's receptors are completely different. I think we often make a comparison to alcohol, meaning you can go into a bar and you can have a glass of wine, you could have a beer, you could have a shot of whiskey. Those are all very different experiences. Some of us could handle them differently. Some of us don't want to handle them differently. It's really about what you want to get out of it, I think, is kind of the bottom line. Dosing, frankly, in my opinion, starts with trial and error. And I would say that from a safe perspective, right, well, I mean, ultimately, there's no way to really know, right? We could tell you what our dosage, my minimum is very different than a lot of other people's minimums, but a lot of it is because I use it often. So it's not just method of delivery, it's also your frequency of use.
Also, I mean, I also think that it's when you smoke a joint, that's a whole different experience than when you're going to eat something. So we always say, start low, go slow. Right. So if it hasn't kicked in, just wait an hour or two. Don't have the second dose. Right. But then, if you're, and I would do it. I would start at home too, because
safe place at home with someone with you. That
the other thing too that I will talk about is when you dose too much. I mean, the worst thing that can happen to you is you're going to fall asleep. You might laugh uncontrollably, or if you're prone to seasickness, which I found out my boyfriend is, he took too much THC and he got sick and spent the entire night on the floor in the bathroom because he was motion sick. So if you're high and you're kind of feeling like this, right, it mimics a rocking boat or any kind of motion sickness. So I think that's something you should, note. But also, if you're one of those people who are prone to motion sickness.
But also, I think a good rule is if you're ever too high, ingest a lot of CBD and it'll help bring you down. It'll help cover those receptors. It'll actually bring you back to life. We do a cannabis-infused dinner series in Boston, and only once, actually, we've had someone who needed some CBD. But
has that ever happened to anyone here? Have you ever Yeah. Hey, it's happened to me too, twice actually. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're prone to motion sickness, if you're one of those people who have trouble on a boat or a carnival ride,
Did someone give you something and not tell you what it was?
Oh, no.
You knew. That's good. That would have been a lot scarier. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you heard David talking about earlier, like 3-to-1, 1-to-1. So I usually, I'll make sure to give him like something that's 5 CBD to maybe 1 THC, stuff like that.
And if you're ingesting THC, the really important thing to remember is that it takes quite a while to kick in. And so many horror stories are people that wait an hour and they don't feel nothing, and they decide to take another one, and then in a half an hour, they're on the floor. So it's important to wait. And
I think one really positive thing that's going to be coming to Chicago, to Illinois in general, is that when the recreational market or adult use market opens up and you go in, you'll be able to have real, thorough conversations with the dispensaries and the owners. And their obligation to you is to help walk you through that process. If you're coming in for a specific ailment, pain, stress, anxiety, whatever it may be, they can help direct you to a strain, help recommend a dose for you to get started with it. If it's an edible, it's kind of the same concept, and really, working through it.
So cooking with the actual plant, making an infusion with the actual flower, is not a super precise process. And we, on page 114 of the issue in your tote bag, we have a dosing chart that can help you do that. However, there are more precise ways to dose your edibles and your food. And you guys want to talk about some concentrates and extracts and things like that?
Oh yeah, one of my favorite concentrates, and you can only get this at a dispensary at the moment, but would be Rso Oil. And Rso is an acronym, stands for Rick Simpson Oil. He was the inventor of it, but it comes in a syringe. There's 10 milligrams in each syringe. It's super concentrated. I think if you get the Rso now in THC form, 1 milligram is 75 grams of THC. So if you take that 1 ml and put it with butter, you want to make sure you have enough butter so that your servings are, divided by 10. Let's say it's, 7, what did I just say? I don't even know. See, I'm not a math person. That's why the chart's in the book. But, and then the opposite is CBD too. So you have a CBD, it's 15 to 1 CBD tincture. And then you have, I'll let you speak to the...
Sure. We cook with a few different vehicles. I think using rosin or using something where rosin is basically a concentrate.
Explain to them what rosin is, because that's going to be, you guys are going to hear that a lot. It's a big thing.
There are a lot of different terms for different concentrates and extracts, and it's not really a uniform or precise vocabulary or lexicon.
But they call rosin the cleanest form of cannabis at the moment, because at the moment that's what it is. And I'll let you can talk about how it's actually frozen.
Right. So the idea in general is when you're growing cannabis, you have to clip the plant when it's ready, hang it upside down, cure it in a dark room with lots of ventilation, and then a lot of the moisture evaporates. The trichomes on the outside, the sticky part on the outside, become prevalent, and then it's time to pick and roll a joint, whatever you do with it. Yeah. Rosin is a process where instead of hanging and curing the plant, they clip it right away and they flash freeze it. So they get super, super frozen, super fast in an airtight container. They take that frozen bud and they put it into, it's more or less a washing machine. It's a smaller version of a washing machine. It's basically a drum that has an arm in the center with a blade on the outside that just agitates, a couple degrees every few seconds and back and forth. And the goal is to really to freeze the trichromes, to freeze the sticky part on the outside, and help those stick to the outside perimeter of the bowl. And on the outside of that bowl is a mesh bag. And there's actually a few layers of bags that have different size holes on them. They're meant to catch different parts of the plant. So you agitate it about 30 to 45 minutes, and they drain the bottom of the bowl, and what's left is all this sticky, pale.
They're literally pulling the oil out of it.
They're pulling the oil, the trichomes, everything out of it. It sticks to this bag. They basically scrape the bag and they dehydrate it, freeze dry it, more or less. And that's actually called bubble hash. That's step one. And it's actually only 2 steps, but that's step one. Step two, they take this golden material and they put it in a mesh bag that is then heated top and bottom to about 200 degrees with a little bit of pressure, and it squeezes out this. It's almost like a golden oil. It turns into a wax. It almost looks like beeswax.
Almost in the same way that they make olive oil. They
it's
put
a
so much
mechanical
pressure
press.
on it, the oil comes out.
Right, and so this is, if you go to a dispensary now and you buy some flour, you might see something that's 23% THC, 24% THC.
33.
Live rosin is 84, 85, 89%. I'm sure, have you guys ever heard of taking a dab?
That's why they call dabbing, like the rosin you dab. It's like
they say, dab will do you. Yeah.
Dabbing is when you heat a concentrate until it vaporizes and you inhale it, and it's like a lightning bolt to your head. Right. But if you use concentrates to cook, it's quite different.
Yes.
If you use concentrates to cook, it's quite different. But the idea to cook with it is to get the flavor. There's no part of the process. There's no butane. There's no ethanol. There's no part of the process where they're diluting the cannabis and then purging the butane out of it, for example, and getting back to the beginning.
But also, I'll interrupt you real quick. The concentrates, in effect, are measured out for you. So when you buy them at a dispensary, which you will all be able to do January 1, you can go in and get a little jar.
You can't buy more than a gram at a time, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're right.
But in that gram, it will say right on the container how much THC and CBD is in it. So then you can take a piece of that and then heat and put it in with your butter or your olive oil, whatever. So that's one.
Right. It's definitely one way to do it. But we'll do it for the flavor. So we'll take my favorite strain is called Sour Tangy. It literally smells like a tangerine. It's just super citrus, and you can smell. If I opened it here, everyone could smell it in the room. So we'll take that and we'll put it into just a plain, grass-fed dairy base and make a creamsicle flavor ice cream from the citrus strain, not adding any oranges, any tangerines of any sort.
I have his ice cream in my freezer right now. It's really good.
And it's amazing what it tastes like. So for us, a lot of people out there in their edibles, they want to hide the flavor of it, and we want to celebrate it. We want to pick certain strains that we love, and we want to taste them full out. So rosin is good for that. I would say rosin is not the most cost-effective way to cook with, per se, but it really is the cleanest. So if you're finding, I know there's been a big conversation around vapes, obviously in the country the last couple months. That's for a different reason, but this is by far the purest thing you can get. Cleanest for your body, cleanest to digest, cleanest to break down, cleanest high, lightest. And I would say also it gives you the rest of the cannabinoids that we haven't really touched on, CBG, CBN, and other things that help with other parts of your body. So it's definitely my preference.
Can we talk just real briefly about the Entourage Effect? And
sure.
Then, what is that Entourage Effect, and how does it relate to all the cannabinoids you just mentioned?
Right. So I think the goal of, I hate saying black market because it sounds like it's
unregulated
it's so
market.
negative. Yeah, unregulated market.
Underground.
People that have been growing for a long time. The goal in the 90s and 2000s was to get the most THC. There's little underground competitions where you'd have the strongest possible plant. And that's changed, and it's changed for the better, where now they're trying to capture all the cannabinoids inside. So THC, CBD are kind of set aside to a degree, and they'll bring in CBG, CBN, some other parts. The Entourage Effect is basically a process into which you're getting the best balance from a cannabis plant. So people will say, as I mentioned earlier, the citrus strain in a certain flower is referred to as the terpene, or the flavor profile there. If you have something that's high in terpenes or terps with a good amount of THC, it's arguably the best body and mental high you can possibly have.
Okay, and I want to ask one more thing before we open up to questions. So if a lot of you have had access to medical dispensaries, or if you've been to recreational dispensaries in other states.
Or if you've gotten it from your, unregulated market guy. Everybody's got a guy.
You've probably noticed that when it comes to edibles, the market is dominated by sugary sweets, gummies, chocolates, things that aren't really good for you. And one of the things that we're all about with the magazine is food that's good for you. Particularly, we have a place of emphasis on savory foods. There's some sugar in there. We're not dead inside, but why? I want to ask David, because I know you have a lot of experience with the dispensary market in Massachusetts. Why is that? Why is there so much sugar. And why shouldn't there be?
Right. So I think a lot of the dispensary owners, the generation that started a lot of these businesses, focused on the stoner culture, which I think was always meant on snacks. It was always like Funyuns to Reese's Pieces to Twinkies to, kind of the silly Hollywood idea of what edibles are supposed to be. And I think people really took to that. I think it was always meant to be a short-lived experience. It was meant to be a single gummy bear, a single piece of chocolate, a single treat, more or less. I don't think it was ever seen as merging into your daily life from a food experience. It was meant to be something that was colorful, something that was bright, something to catch your eye, something, like you do candy for children, right? It's supposed to have an emblem on them or a logo or a mascot or something to that effect. And I think that's how it started. It's slowly starting to change. It definitely has a long way to go. I think there are definitely people that go through autoimmune diseases like me, where I need a good amount of sugar and I want a fair amount of sugar with it. There's obviously, and we can touch on the THC and how your bioavailability when it's next to sugar. But there are definitely boosts that I need in the morning. I'll choose a sativa strain, which is something that typically is uplifting with a little bit of coffee and a little bit of sugar. And for me, it starts my day without certain pain medications that I have access to.
And I'm the opposite of David. I actually can't have sugar. I have an insulin resistance problem, so I need to make sure that I eat in order to keep myself from becoming diabetic. And so I have to watch my sugar intake, my carb intake. I can't have sugar. It makes me feel sick. So we talk about that a lot, even with the magazine. And you want to tell them about the story? We're working on our winter issue now, and I'll let you talk about what we've sort of discovered
Yeah,
that.
we commissioned a story on the endocannabinoid system and how basically it receives THC or cannabinoids in general and how it processes them. 'Cause
When
it's
you
not
eat them.
Yeah, when you eat them versus when you inhale them. And we have a neuroscientist who quoted the study that she did that says, okay, so you smoke a joint, you smoke a pipe, that metabolizes into a certain form of THC that hits you right away, goes to your head. When you ingest it, it goes through your liver and it metabolizes into a different form of THC that produces a longer lasting, more intense high, which can be beneficial to people with certain conditions. However, the same neuroscientist says that when you pair cannabis with sugar, your body is always going to go for the sugar first. And the presence of the sugar is going to inhibit the absorption of the THC. So this to me is amazing.
I'm so excited about it. I've been saying it forever.
This to me is amazing why sugar is so prevalent in the legal and illegal market. Because it inhibits particularly THC. Not a lot is known about how the body processes CBD or other cannabinoids, but that's something we're trying to change with the magazine, and we hope it changes in the world at large.
Do you guys all know what terpenes are? No? Yes? Okay. So terpenes are oils from the plant. So the same way that, I always say this to people, the same way that your bartender would squeeze an orange peel and the little oil that comes out of the rind, those are terpenes. So the cannabis plant has terpenes in the same way. And every cannabis plant has a different set of terpene or a terpene profile, it's a flavor. You've heard David talk about the citrusy rosin.
Right.
Those are the terpenes that make that certain cannabis citrusy or...
and there's lots of foods in the world that have them, like lemongrass has a high amount, mangoes have a high amount, lavender has a high amount.
Right.
So they're found in plants in general. I think people, have
every plant has them.
Yeah, I think essential oils, like burning essential oils in your home, people are like, oh, I breathe better. It's like, yeah, you do because you're inhaling terpenes. It's opening up your body. It's causing your metabolic rate to slow down slightly, so you're getting more oxygen and you feel more relaxed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same process in this. This is definitely in more concentrated amounts, but you can tell.
And you can use cannabis terpenes without being high, correct? So, like for instance, this lemonade is a terpene lemonade recipe from Chef David. So you can taste some of the terpenes in that lemonade without being high.
How did you do that?
Yes, how did you do that?
So like part of it is proprietary, but we infused, a friend of mine in Boston has a honey company where he imports honey from around the world, all from sustainable sources. So this honey is actually a Tupelo honey from Louisiana that he ships in, and so we work we're actually going to be putting CBD honey out to everyone with high terpene content.
Which you'll be able to find at Kitchen Toke.
Which you'll be able to find on Kitchen Toke's website. So we do it slowly in small batches. I think that's really the idea, is to control it, because like any other plant, if a lot of cannabis is grown indoors, a lot of stuff you'll find in dispensaries, I would say 90% of it's probably indoors unless you're in Colorado or California, and that has different effects than natural weather, right? So if you're eating a radish and the summer was really sunny, it's going to be spicier than if it wasn't. So terpenes, these oils are the same process. So you really have to you can't take some that were harvested this month versus next month and expect the same result. It's just not that way. It's a natural organism. So we do it in small batches really to control the output.
That's a lot. It's really easy to nerd out and get lost in the rabbit hole.
I don't want to.
But that's what we're here for. We're working on our ninth issue.
This is number
7.
So what you guys have is 7. This is number 8, and our 9th issue will be out in mid-December.
That's what we're here for. We're trying
and then
to.
Chef David's in this issue as well. His ice cream recipes, I highly recommend them. I have them in my home freezer.
A fascinating story about Chef David in this issue, written by myself. But that's what we're trying to do with the magazine. We're trying to destigmatize, and we're trying to make this accessible to people that can use it that don't have any experience. So, Go.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know if I'm trying to destigmatize it. I'm just being me, and Kitchen Toke is very much a reflection of me and the people that we work with. And if you want to call me a stoner, then I guess I am. So, I mean, I think I'm just putting a new face on what a stoner is, and I think a stoner is everybody. It's not just...
You're a stoner that doesn't get stoned.
I think the optics...
You're a stoner that doesn't get stoned.
Well, I mean, I probably am high at night because I dose at night, but if you wake me up at 2 or 3 in the morning, I probably am. I just don't like to do it during the workday. I don't know about you, but I've got way too much shit to do.
See that? Yeah, and everyone's different because I will get high all day. But it affects me differently, and I think that's really what everyone needs to accept, and I think that's what's changing, is the culture around it is changing. We're not... it doesn't make me lazy. I'm not watching silly movies late at night. It's not, this Hollywood's done a great job of putting this out there for everyone. And I think, no one can tell you what makes you feel better, and no one should. You should be able to choose what you use as medicine or to medicate, whether it's, something that you get from a dispensary or something that you grow yourself. I think you should be able to make that decision. And frankly, a lot of the drugs that were easily accessible to me are horrible, and they've hurt a lot of people in our country. And I think cannabis has been something that has been suppressed for a long time, and thankfully we're alive during, I would say, probably the most exciting point. So, it's changing for the better.
With that, do you guys have any questions?
I think we should,
Yeah, so I've got a mic here, and my colleague Becky does as well. We'll bring it around to you. Just be sure to speak into the mic.
I've got one over here. Hi, thank you. How do you spell rosin?
Rosin is R-O-S-I-N.
R-O-S-I-N. Thank
Correct.
you.
Yeah, sure.
There's also a product called Resin,
Resin.
R-E-S-I-n.
yeah. Yeah, it's just in case you weren't confused enough.
Could be.
Hi. Coming here, I didn't know really what to expect. I was more curious than anything, and I want to, thank you for really illuminating things that I had absolutely no idea existed. At the same time, I'm also curious because you espouse many different medical analyses here. Mm-hmm. Where'd you get that information from? What's your background?
My personal background?
Well, whoever wants to take the responsibility. Yeah, you've been the one who's been mostly referring to it.
Sure.
Other than having unfortunately Crohn's disease, but...
Well, that's a big part of it. I mean, I've sat through, politely, more colonoscopies, more MRIs, more cameras in parts of my body, including my throat and everything else, than I would say most people in this room, and frankly, probably more than anyone together. So it's been something that I've spent every free time, every flight, every morning, every afternoon, every evening, trying to understand what people were recommending to me and why they were recommending it to me. I think dissecting what cannabis does for you at different times in the day, different types of it, and how it affects you. For me, I've read, I don't know, 300 plus studies, mostly from the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of New England, or I should say Crohn's Colitis Foundation. My local chapter is the New England chapter. I've spoken with countless people that are in the same treatment that I was in, taking Remicade. My brother takes Humira. Crohn's disease is prevalent in Jewish bloodlines, which my father is Persian, and so he has ulcerative colitis. I have Crohn's disease. They haven't figured out what my other brother has. So it's come from lots of different sources, but mostly it's from things that I've experienced personally.
So none of us up here, to answer your question, have a medical background, and no one can call themselves a cannabis expert. When someone introduces me as an expert, I usually say I'm not an expert. There is no such thing.
Well, actually, the follow-up question was, is there any recognizable organization that is addressing the very issue of cannabis and the consumption of it, especially in edibles?
Is there one particular medical
Such as
organization?
any medical facility?
Well, let's just start with saying that cannabis is still federally illegal.
Right.
There's not enough testing going on, and they won't test on it, and they won't allocate the dollars because it's federally illegal still. So even though our state and other states have passed it legally, it's still it's Schedule I drug that is missing a lot of testing. So all of the things that we talk about in the magazine are source-based and fact-based. And I always say we report the facts as we know them, and those facts change with the more and more research that's being done. So if we report on a story and we can't find the result, we'll say that. We can't find anyone, but we'll circle back and come back to it. So
There is research, however. I mean, there's research done in other countries
Israel.
that we have access to. I mean, we talk to researchers in every issue, and that is changing. There is more and more research every day. There's going to be more research. It's a tidal wave. It's not going to stop. It's eventually going to break open.
We've got another question here.
I would real quick say that the Mayo Clinic has a lot of good research out there that you could look into. John Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic are some of the leading advocates behind it.
We've got a question here in the middle.
Can you explain nanodosing?
Yeah, so typically people call microdosing anything 10 milligrams or less. Nanodosing is significantly smaller. And for me, I like to do with 1 to 2 milligrams. So I usually start my day with a 1-to-1, 1 milligram of THC to 1 milligram CBD. So I'd have that with my coffee. And then I'll do that 2 or 3 times more during the day. The only thing that I can explain to you is, I say this often, it's like I work out or I exercise or I do Pilates. When I don't exercise or I don't sleep well, I notice. That's how I feel when I'm not dosing like that all day. I can only say to you when I'm traveling, because I don't travel with the stuff that I have, I'm still nervous about it. But I can only tell you that I feel different, and I can't sleep well. I feel off. I can't recall things that I want to. Most of the time I'm not as sharp or, as focused. So I can only explain to you what that feels like when I'm not.
Okay, come back over here.
Hi there. Thanks for all the information. I have bought lots of edibles, but I've not done a lot of cooking myself. And you guys shared a lot of wonderful information, but do you have in the magazine or somewhere like a really easy sort of cooking 101 with oil or with fats, just to kind of get that rolling in my kitchen? I've tinkered around before to like really no successful avail.
Sure.
And so just to like, if I had flour and I was ready to do it, do you have an easy recipe for that?
At kitchentoke.com, we don't have every recipe we've ever published, but we do have many, and there's a subset within them of infusions. It'll teach you how to make basic infusions: butter, coconut oil, milk, cream, almond milk, honey, simple syrup. There's, I think, like maybe a half dozen of them now.
Yep. And stay tuned. Next week we're going to be we're going into production on how to make butter, like step-by-step video. We're going to be working on some of that stuff for you guys too.
We've got one here in the front.
Thank you very much. I have a dear friend who's just been diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer, and she faces chemotherapy and substantial surgery and more chemotherapy. The strangest things interact negatively with chemo. It's hard to, as a layperson, to second guess what will not help the process of the healing. Is this something that you're, in your experience or what you hear from people, that high-level oncologists and such are familiar with using and are receptive to using? I was moved by your story of your friend's father. How wonderful that you did that for him. It sounded as though he was in a hospice situation when you saw him. In a treatment situation, it's a little different story. And I wonder if this is applicable to that situation and how one navigates that.
Ironically, he was at home still. He was at home, but I would find it hard to believe that any oncologist nowadays would not have an opinion on cannabis. I would never recommend somebody to stop taking their medication and use cannabis. I think cannabis, would help with sleep, comfort, eating, appetite, and inflammation.
I think when I first asked my doctor if that was something that would affect the pills that I was taking at the time, he was very thoughtful and careful in navigating what he could recommend and what he could say. He gave the go-ahead that it wouldn't negatively affect. I was taking a drug called mercaptopurine, or 6-MP at the time, and he could not issue, that organization, Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, could not issue a medical card, but he gave me the green light to go get one and said that it wouldn't affect anything that I was already taking. I've had 2 friends in life that have passed from cancer, and both of them really loved having THC because it sparked their appetite. So it helped them get a lot of sleep, but mostly it gave them the appetite to eat, which helped a lot of other things function properly. So
You have no evidence that it interferes with
I think,
something like St. John's wort, for example, which sounds innocent.
sure, I would not pretend to be an authority on stating that. I think everyone's different, and of course, what they're dealing with is well, diverse. But in my experience, from what I understand, that it would definitely spark a lot of their positive appetites and sleep.
Is she having trouble with her doctor, or getting some help in this regard with her doctor?
She's at the very beginning of this process.
Okay, I would say if her particular doctor is not into it or just not versed in it, Gilda's Club in Chicago is a great resource for that. They can point her in the right direction, maybe help her find some people that can put her on the right path.
I'll get you right over here.
Thank you. I'm actually a clinical pharmacist, so I just wanted to make a point of clarification for your question that you had earlier. So THC is still Schedule 1, which does mean it's virtually illegal. But earlier this year, the FDA actually approved the first cannabidiol product, Epidiolex. This is used for pediatric seizures, so there is some research and some efforts ongoing. And additionally, for the chemotherapy question, there actually is a synthetic THC product commercially available and approved by the FDA that your friend can ask her doctor about. Each chemotherapy regimen is individualized and very different, so to answer in a general way would be kind of impossible. But I also had a question, so sorry for talking so much. Any insight or evidence on the safety or efficacy of THC or CBD in pregnancy?
We did that story, didn't we? I think we touched on that, cannabis and pregnancy. We did a little story about it, but I don't really have a lot of information on it now. No.
It's a good idea, though.
Yeah. Also, I was going to say, to your point, just to be clear, the federal government owns the patent on medical marijuana. So I think that's part of the problem in legalizing it right now. They're trying to figure out how they can make the most money from it before they give it to all of us. So I just want to be clear, and I'll be super clear, and I'm sorry, but I'm not on board with synthetic anything. I like plants over pills, so if I'm going to have cannabis, I want the full plant, and I would highly recommend you go get some really beautiful flower from the dispensary and make your own edibles over Epidiolex any day.
We've got one here.
I'm a little confused. I'm in Florida for part of the year, and I drive down the street, and on every other corner, there's a sign out, CBD oil sold here.
Sure.
Now, and marijuana is illegal in Florida. So what's the story here? I mean...
It's mostly extracted from hemp, which has 0 THC in it.
Yeah,
Okay, so...
hemp is federally legal.
Okay, so when you take that, you're not going to get high at all,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Well,
And what?
I mean, you're not going to get THC. There's no THC to get you high from
There's
it.
0.3% THC. So
Not a-
if you take it, THC will show up in a blood test. If you have a job where you get drug tested, it will show up.
Oh, boy.
But that's also assuming that the CBD you're buying is in any of those stores in Florida is what it says it is.
Right.
Because all of that CBD that you see everywhere sold legally over the counter is unregulated. You have no idea what's in it.
But when you said the CBD-infused limeade, you're not going to get high from that. Why is that?
There's 0% THC in this CBD.
Okay.
In the CBD he's using, there's 0%.
Okay. So what? And one more question: why, when you dose, do you combine CBD with THC? Why wouldn't you
Why
just?
do I?
Yeah. Why wouldn't you just use plain THC?
For the same reason, when we talked about the Entourage Effect, so I'm a firm believer that when you eat the whole plant or you take in the whole plant, you get the most benefit from it. I'm also not being drug tested because I work for me. But no, really, all joking aside, because I want the full benefit. I want all the aspects of the plant. So when you isolate certain properties, whether it's CBN, CBD, CBDV, THC, CBG, when you isolate things, I think you lose a lot of the full plant. And I really like things, for the same reason we go and shop for Whole Foods, I want my whole plant.
And those will usually be labeled as full spectrum. Yeah.
Yep.
And the Entourage Effect is this theory or this idea that these things work best together rather than in isolation.
Yeah, yeah.
We have time for one more question. Had her hand back.
So my question, given all this legal, illegal, country-owned, state-owned, have you all either been in touch with Pritzker, or has he reached out to you all about just this whole subject?
Tell him to call us.
No,
I've sent him magazines. He does know we exist. Yeah, he knows we exist.
Educate.
Yeah. So I've sent him magazines. He knows we exist. In 2017, when just after we had launched, I started Kitchen Toke in late 2016. In 2017, Senator Heather Staines and her field rep invited me to come and speak before the Illinois Legislative Committee. We've come a long way since then, but at the time, I spoke before the Illinois Legislative Committee to talk about what I was doing, what I was working on, where I was making my product. And at the time, I was the only female minority in the ancillary cannabis space. So if you can, you guys have read news, you know what's happening. There are a lot of people now in the space, especially in Illinois. So we've come a long way in just a short 2 years. But to answer your question, I've never had a conversation with Pritzker. I would be happy to. Mm-hmm. Well, Pritzker's family is also in the growing, cultivating business too. So he has family. I think that's part of his pro stance on cannabis. He has family who are growers, cultivators, and makers.
Can we answer this gentleman's question in the back? He's had his hand up for just
Sure.
one quick one.
Yeah, totally.
I was just going to ask, with the, relative explosion and popularity of CBD as the celebrity cannabinoid as of, the last 18 to 36 months, what other market efficiencies would be needed to bring a scalable CBG product? If you look at the price point of CBD, it's a $3,500 to $5,000 price point for a kilogram of CBD isolate, whereas CBG, which is the life back end to the plant, may not be as popular at this point, but the price point is it's a $35,000 kilogram for an isolate of CBG. So what level or what type of market efficiencies would need to come into play in order to allow a scalable CBG product, to be introduced in the market?
Before I answer that question, I see all of you guys leaving. Before you head out, I just want to tell all of you, if you go to kitchentoke.com, we put a special discount code. Just type in Humanities and you'll get 20% off of, which is the most I've ever actually offered, but it's 20% off of a subscription. So Humanities. All right, go ahead.
I would say there's a couple of things. One is the medical community to come on board, because a lot of the equipment that's needed to extract CBG is really expensive, and there's very few companies that are providing that equipment, so that's a big part of it. I think it's also waste. So getting to CBG, you have to discount a lot of other cannabinoids in that process to extract it properly.
Do you guys know what CBG is? CBG stands for cannabigerol. And it's known to calm your thinking, mostly. That's what I think of it as.
Yeah, right. It doesn't help you fall asleep, but it helps you stay asleep because it's calming a lot of synapses in your body.
It doesn't make you high when it's isolated. There are some companies called, I think, Level Blends. You can put it under a little tab under your tongue, but CBG is...
I think it's just, honestly, it's just time in the market. I think time will bring it to light. I think when more people understand and are educated about it, when it's presented in the way that it should be, it'll hit a market in the right way. But in my opinion, just personally, it's going to be from the medical community.
I think it's going to be the next big thing, actually. I'm glad you asked it.
It absolutely is.
You've heard a lot about THC and CBD. I think CBG is going to be the next thing.
And that's kind of what I mean is the medical, right, exactly.
Whether it's in tabs or,
Yeah.
They've got to extract it some way, so it's going to be in some kind of oil form or tab form or something.